Beep, 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 beep. Ring, ring.
What? Hello?
Hello, may I speak to Jim Washburn of Costa Mesa, California, please?
Um, well, that's me.
Hi, Jim. How are you today?
I'm just fine.
Thanks for picking up.
So the least I could do is just sitting here looking at my hip pocket record of Van Morrison with Dan Armstrong playing a custom-made Danelectro bass behind him.
I
Ta-da!
knew there was a reason I placed the call to the hotline.
Just
Uh,
happened to be holding it. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to On the Lipstick Pickup Podcast, Mr. Washburn.
Well, yours might be the most noble podcast around.
That means a lot coming from you. I appreciate the journalistic spirit of that. We've been planning on doing this a long time and we're finally getting it done. I'm so excited to make a recording with you today. But many of my listeners will know who you are if they are interested in what I call the Danosphere, which
Well,
is this big world of everything Danelectro, from amps to guitars, Silvertone, Jerry Jones, all of it. But some of them might not. And I want to introduce you to my listeners first by telling them that when I quote your intel, some of the things that you've taught me over the last couple of years, I often refer to you as Dano Journo Jim Washburn. You've written books and done all kinds of magazines and probably technical writing, everything as a professional writer.
newspapers. Yeah.
You've written a lot about Danelectro.
Mhm.
Yeah, newspapers. That's right. You
Yeah.
have a newspaper background, but you have a special relationship with Danelectro instruments, and you also have a collection of specimens.
Mhm.
And it's so many interesting anecdotal stories to tell over the years, and that is why I'm so happy to have you.
Well, thanks for having
Thanks
me
for
on.
coming.
Yeah. So where should we start?
Let's explain to everybody you doing most of the talking. Talk to me about your relationship with these instruments. Take it from the top.
Okay. It's funny where, I actually fell into journalism because of Danelectros. And I
Ooh.
got into Danelectros because when I was like 13, I heard this band on the radio called Spirit. I saw them open for Cream. I was 13 years old at a Cream concert at the Anaheim Convention Center. And as wonderful as Cream was, I liked Spirit a whole lot better, having seen them. And it took me a while to figure out what Randy California, the guitar player, was playing. And it was a Danelectro made Silvertone one pickup guitar that was about as simple as an electric guitar could be. Again, it's made out of masonite. Everyone else was playing, guitars with flame maple tops and, top of the line sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where Barrett Hansen, who many people know better as Dr. Demento, in the 60s lived in the same house in Topanga Canyon that the band Spirit lived in. And a couple of the members actually offered to slip him some money if he would accidentally, on purpose, run over Randy's guitar in the driveway. So he would have to go out and get a more respectable guitar. But meanwhile, I'd never heard a guitar sound like that.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, a lot of it was just his playing style, where he could go from sound like Wes Montgomery to Jimi Hendrix in a flash and have a guitar that could handle both like effortlessly. And that was his main guitar through most of Spirit's original 1960s career.
Mm-hmm.
And that really got me into them. Nobody was writing books about guitars then. And even Guitar Player at the time in the 60s might have one or two articles about rock musicians per
Mm-hmm.
issue, but they didn't seem to have much respect for it. It was more like classical music, country players, that sort of stuff, that jazz players that they covered back then. So it was hard to find out information. It found, you just learn it incrementally and that sort of stuff. A lot of what I learned about Danelectros is one day I saw an ad in the Los Angeles Times classified section that listed somebody selling like a lot of like the really rare archtop guitars in the world, like D'Angelicos and that sort of stuff. And then it had a phone number. Then after the phone number, it had Dan Armstrong. So I thought, this is either Dan Armstrong selling stuff or he's selling a Dan Armstrong plexiglass guitar. In either case, I thought I better call this guy. And it was Dan Armstrong. He had, for a short while, was living in Pacific Palisades out here in California. This is after he had made the plexiglass guitar for Ampeg back east and had designed various Ampeg amps and all. And also he still had a music store in New York City. But he
Mm-hmm.
was living out in California, and he decided to move to England to make those guitars he later made out of mahogany and had sliding pickups and things to finance his move there. He sold off a lot of his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I called him up, asked if he's selling any Danelectros. He said, yeah, one. And he was, about an hour's drive down from where I was living in Newport Beach at the time. And he drove down in his MG car for like an hour to sell me a Danelectro for $100. And I was so gone on Danelectros, he also offered to sell me the original prototype for the plexiglass guitar. But he said he didn't like, for the same price. But he said he didn't really like the neck on that one so much. So I just said, oh, let's go with the Danelectro. And what he brought down was like basically what everyone calls the Jimmy Page model, the black two pickup one that Jimmy Page was seen playing all the time. So bought that from him. And while he was down, he spent about 90 minutes sitting at my parents' kitchen there, explaining how guitars worked. Drawing out diagrams of wiring. I think I even have one here handy. Oh yeah, this little thing, written on, whatever note paper was handy in the kitchen at that time, and trying out these, simple wiring diagrams
Man.
things we're doing, and the address if in case I had any questions or problems of his music store in New York City and things. So I just dug this out a couple minutes ago, and and it was fascinating. I learned so much just about Danelectros, but also just guitars in general, from how to string them and all these other things. There was just a wealth of information. And he drove off and moved to England, and that was that. And so that's like the beginning of my love for Danelectros. Um, and we can go into my first one later and all that sort of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
but I learned enough about them that
Your run-in with Dan Armstrong is just so fascinating to me. I've got some questions about that real
okay,
quick.
yeah,
Am I right in that one reason why he had so many of these things, he was a real craftsman, but didn't he buy a lot of the parts, when Dano sold some things off, and he was known for his modified ones, right?
yeah.
Isn't
But
that,
even
yeah.
he did those on a grander scale when Danelectro went out of business. But before that, uh, he got into Danelectros because when he opened his music shop, he was doing repairs and stuff, but also wanted to sell instruments. And the franchises in New York City for like all the main brands like Guild and Gibson and Fender and all the other known brands, stores already had the exclusives on those. So he
Mm-hmm.
started carrying down Electros because he said he realized they were essentially very good guitars, and with some modifications, they were kind of great guitars.
Yeah.
And he started modding them then. And
Ah.
there were a couple of telltale signs you could always tell it was a guitar he had modified. For one thing, he hated the stacked knobs on down Electros because he was a gigging musician, and he
Mm-hmm.
thought they were just kind of useless in a live situation. You would turn one knob and the other knob would go with it and that sort of stuff. And so he'd rewire his where they just had a single volume and a single tone control, and he always put the Gibson knobs on them, which are sort of handsome knobs, like black knobs with like a little chrome little dome in the center of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you see an old Danelectro with those on them, it's a sign that they'd probably have been through his shop. And he also usually would put, the little strap pegs on the bottoms of guitars. Instead of one in the center, he would put two to the side
Hmm.
because it was more places you could put your strap, and also would make the guitar a little less prone to fall over.
Hmm.
And so those were kind of the giveaways of stuff he had worked on in his shop and sold to people. And then when Danelectro went out of business, he bought a lot of bodies and necks from them. And for some reason, Ampeg was having trouble getting up to speed putting out the plexiglass guitars, but the word was already out on them. So just for a brief while to kind of get the name and sell something out there, he was selling the Danelectro modified Dan Armstrong Danelectro guitars.
These had the pick. It said it on the pick guard, right? It says Dan
Yeah,
Armstrong modified. Okay.
no, those ones did.
Okay.
And again, mostly it was just rewiring the electronics and spiffing a few things up. And on the guitar model, Um, I don't think a few of them came out with the normal Danelectro, you know, everybody loves them, lipstick pickups on them. But other ones were just like a rectangular pickup that was bigger because people seem, ever since people noticed humbuckers and how loud they were, people wanted bigger pickups with a bigger sound. So he, on his modified Danelectro guitars, he would have a rectangular pickup on there that either had one or two just regular Danelectro coils stuffed inside of it.
Ah. So it was more of a look than it was a sound difference, or
No,
those different. Oh, okay.
yeah, it didn't really sound that different. And also,
Okay.
not too many of those show up. The basses show up more than the guitars do. And they both get the job done.
Yeah. We have discussed this old video of the bassist Ron Carter playing. Haven't we talked about how
Wait,
there's a really old video of him out there playing what I think is a modified Dan
it
Armstrong? Have we
was.
talked about? Yeah,
Yeah, it was, and you could tell it. I forget how you could tell because it's been a while since I've looked at it, but it was obviously one of Dan's,
yeah.
one of the manufactured ones that went through Ampeg's distribution. And I tried contacting Ron Carter, and all of the people that work for him call him the maestro. They say the maestro says sort of stuff because Ron was known for hating the electric bass. He just
Exactly.
thought
That's why it's
it
such a
wasn't,
unicorn moment. I love
you know,
that.
a viable instrument. And the video we're talking about is when he's backing up Bobby Hebb doing
Yes.
Sunny, Bobby
Yes.
Hepp's big song. And it was just Bobby Hepp on guitar, who had pretty good jazz chops, and then Ron Carter playing the bass behind him. And it was a Dan Armstrong, Danelectro. So I tried to
Fantastic.
ask him, what about that, and all this stuff. And all they said back is the maestro remembers having it, but that's all he remembers about it. And I said, and he also had a Rickenbacker or something. So that's all he had to say
Yeah,
on the subject. But yeah, that's
that's awesome.
the Dan Armstrong ones don't show up that much. So
A fascinating character to me. I think I told you we've had several video conferences that we didn't record.
yeah.
And I think I told you that I was fascinated to find electric sitar being played on a Doobie Brothers song.
Hmm.
I can't remember the name of the title right now. And I went to the credits and it's Dan Armstrong playing it. So I think he must have done that when he was in California, session work or
Yeah,
something.
it could
Yeah.
be. He did a lot of New York too.
Yeah.
And
And
things.
he didn't he play with Van Morrison for a while?
Yeah, I don't know if he's on any of the records,
Yeah.
but it's like I had this record for years before I realized that's Dan Armstrong behind him.
Wow.
Obviously, I noticed it was a Danelectro right away, but also, Danelectro never made a bass with that exact. Well, they did, but not.
Yeah.
Um, their budget bass, which was like a double cutaway like that, but they were all kind of with the bronze color or whatever they were, and it only had a 15 fret neck.
Yeah.
So like it was sort of like a beginner's bass that they put out in a way. Dan had full length neck that like the Longhorns had and all,
Yeah.
and that I don't know if the first one was one he made for himself, but Jesse Colin Young, somewhere here I've got those photos, who was the bass player and lead singer in the band the Youngbloods. Um, had he originally started off, I don't have photos of him handy, with he started with a Longhorn bass.
Mm.
At one point the body broke, and so Dan made him a new one with the Longhorn neck, put on a standard kind of double cutaway guitar body as
Oh, that's
depicted
a.
there.
I don't think I've seen that photograph.
But
Killer, he's
that's
holding.
well, that's Jesse Colin Young in that one,
Yeah.
and as is in that one as well. And so that's where that thing came from, and it's basically what Dan made for himself as well, which is one of the standard double cutaway bodies with two pickups, but with a Longhorn neck on it. So
That's an
there's
endorsement. If Dan Armstrong wants to play that instrument, it's got mojo.
and there were, as you probably know, there were not any guitar books back then. There weren't any magazines really addressing budget guitars or anything like that. So you had to find information where you could find it. Like, you'd see
Yeah.
this photo of Jesse Colin Young playing a Danelectro. I think, what can I learn about that? The
Yeah.
and if you're absolutely nuts on Danelectros, you can notice like the Blind Faith album with Eric Clapton and the little super group with Steve Winwood and that. Then he's
Hmm.
holding a Danelectro, and he's holding it sideways. You have to be absolutely nuts on Danelectros to recognize one from the side. Yet there
Yeah.
was on that album cover. So it's you just see those and try to find out what's behind them.
Yeah.
And eventually, there is actually one photo of Eric Clapton playing his Danelectro on a Cream gig back when they were still playing small clubs in London.
Mm.
So it's just it was hard to find information then.
Yeah. They have an underreported presence in recording history, and I want to thank you. I knew who Spirit was, I'd heard of them, but you were the one who told me at least a couple of years ago, Spirit, you need to go listen to this. And you told me what record to start with, and that is just fabulous. Tone, I will tell you, it's good.
Yeah.
I know you saw them live, but the recording is fabulous.
Yeah, and that was the band and Randy's playing that got a lot of people I know into Danelectros.
Yeah.
I think I told you I met Steve Soest because he was this slightly older hippie guy in the row ahead of me at a club called the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach, where Spirit would kind of do, and they were mostly playing, good sized arenas and things at that point in their career, but they would kind of do a shakedown show or a
Hmm.
couple of days of shows at this place called the Golden Bear to kind of get their act ready to take out on the road. So you got to see them from, 3 or 4 rows away, which was fabulous. And then the guy in the row ahead of me, I just heard him say the word Danelectro. I thought, I better get to know this guy. And it was Steve Soest, and we've known each other ever since then. That was like 1970, I think.
Another watershed moment in your life, you and your buddy Steve
Yeah.
Sost, who I don't know, but I know about his authority on the instruments too, and that y'all have been collaborators, cohorts, and co-conspirators
Oh,
this
yeah.
whole time. And on that, I told you about some of the things I wanted to ask you about, these anecdotal things. And you go way back with Jonathan Richman, and you and I have talked about what a fan I am of him,
Yeah.
his entire recording career, his guitar playing. An unconventional guitar hero
Mhm.
is what I call Jonathan Richman. But you go way back with him, and I want you to tell me a little bit about that as much as you want to. But I
Mhm.
also want you to tell me about this baritone electric sitar
Mhm.
that you and your buddy Steve Sos, your
Yeah.
cohort, made for him. So
Mhm.
tell me about that.
Okay. Jonathan kind of crept into my life when I was running a record store in Anaheim. It was called Beggar's Banquet, and we mostly selling like used records, rare records, bootlegs, a lot of bootlegs and things. And one day I was at the record distributor, and they had a bunch of cutout records from the Berserkly label, and I bought them, and then there were several Jonathan Richman albums in there, and I'd never listened to them. I thought we just paid 90 cents for this record. I can afford to listen to that, and open it up, put it on, and start listening to it. And customers would come in, and I'd start saying, "Listen to this idiot," because I like it was the kind of childish sounding music in a way. And listen to this, and after a few more listens, I realized this guy understands life better than I do. He kind of
Yes.
knows what matters. And I became a big fan, started seeing him live. Actually, I think the first time I saw him live, no, the third time I saw him live, he was at the Golden Bear, again, this place in Huntington Beach. And I had a single cutaway Silvertone Danelectro, the kind that came in the case with the built-in amp in it. And I wasn't playing it because they're not good upside down where the horns are so much. So I brought that to give to him. And I thought, I bet he loved this guitar. And he said, thanks, but I'm not really into possessions. If you gave this to me, I'd just give it away to Ronnie Blakely or somebody. I
Wow.
said, oh, well. And then, but, talked to him ever so briefly then. And then we can discuss the Danelectro article, but because I had written an article along with Steve Soest in Guitar World magazine, the music editor at the Orange County Register, which was like the second biggest newspaper on the West Coast at the time, the music editor didn't know much about music, so he was always calling me up at the record store with questions. And when they moved him upstairs and made him an editor, they brought me in as the rock music writer for the paper.
Hmm.
And one of the early people I interviewed there was Jonathan, because I was such a fan of him, and he was coming down to Southern California, so I set up an interview, and it was at his home. And I call him up, and he answers, and the first thing he says on the phone is, "If this starts sounding like an interview, I'm hanging up." So I kept it as conversational as I could. I guess he liked the result.
Oh, it's so
Yeah,
great.
and also he had a guitar player in his band at the time named Brennan Totten, whose mother was a school teacher down in Orange County, where I am, and she was a fan of my writing and was always sending, the guitarist in Jonathan's band's copies of the articles I'd written. So I kind of had that entree there, and before long we wound up becoming friends. And all this stuff. I went out on the road with him a time just for the fun of it and help him with his gear. I played on 3 of his albums, wrote about him a lot over time, and we're still friends. He was just here at the house a week ago.
Amazing.
And one of the times he was staying at the house, I had a six-string bass sitar made for me by Steve. I designed it, Steve built it, another friend put the finish on it, and it was all Danelectro parts, Danelectro neck and everything except for the body he custom made, which I'll pull out in a moment. And Jonathan was playing that and liked it a lot, all the stuff, and decided he wanted one. And so Steve and I took one of the Hodad basses that the Danelectro company was recently making then, found a lovely blue one, and just basically all we had to do was add two more tuners, change the nut, put a sitar bridge on it, and away it went. And he decided he liked it with baritone strings as opposed to bass better, so that's what we made for him. And I think he still has the thing. I hope so. It's on one of his records somewhere, I think.
I found it. The name escapes me, but I found it, and he uses it like a mystic. And you were talking about his songwriting, and it sounds kind of childish at first, and then you listen to it and you think of From the Mouth of Babes. He really is such a. I just saw him perform a couple of years ago, and he was amazing. He's a spirit animal as much as a rock and roller to
Hmm.
me. I've
Oh,
seen him
yeah.
a bunch over the years, and that's quite a testament. If he's not a possession type of person, for him to go, okay, now I need to possess that one
Mhm.
at least.
Yeah.
that
He's playing nylon string classical guitars almost exclusively these days. And for the last
yeah,
several years, that's been him, which is also kind of unique in rock music. A guy touring around with a drummer with a full drum kit and him with the classical guitar, and that's it.
yeah.
And he also usually does his own mixing from the stage. He doesn't really trust sound men. So he kind of handles that from the stage as well with like a small portable PA going into their house speakers and things.
I've heard he doesn't like air conditioning. Is that right? He doesn't.
That's very true.
Yeah, I've had people tell me that. I spoke to one of his road managers when I saw him, at the merch table, and we were talking about that. And he goes, "Yeah, he likes it hot."
Yeah. Well, also he just does, air conditioning does something to the air and it's not good on a singing voice particularly.
Yeah,
And so he'll make his audiences sweat, rather than, have it affecting his voice. He had a period of time when he couldn't tour. He kind of lost his voice and I forget it was polyps on his throat or something like that, but he dealt with it organically and just it took him an extra year or something as opposed to having surgery, which
yeah,
he just wasn't going to go for, before he could really sing well again and that sort of stuff. And he became a lot less talkable after shows just because somehow after singing, talking for an hour would really, you know, hurt his voice and all. So
yeah,
he isn't aloof. He just was trying to save his voice when he wasn't talking so much between shows.
yeah.
Sometimes just write notes for them on paper after they'd ask him a question.
I'm a big fan of him, and I love those stories. I wanted to get them on the record. When I've talked about some of the conversations, when I've relayed some of our conversations to other people, I always say, he knows Jonathan Richman.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll get to meet him one day. I've seen him live a bunch over the years, but that I
Yeah.
get that stuff on the record, and also my respect for his recording career and your experience with him and hearing about that guitar too. That's cool.
Yeah. And he knows people in Nashville. I only know Chris Scruggs because
Yeah.
one of the times Jonathan showed up at my house, Chris Scruggs and his mom was with him. Because his mom, oh, God, I hate this. Was it? Her name will come to me in a moment. It's embarrassing. I'm not remembering it right now, but good singer on her own and wrote a number of country hits and all that stuff. And Jonathan liked her stuff a lot.
Hmm.
And took her. He just did a short tour of the West Coast with her as the opening act, and Chris went along as a guitar player.
Fun.
So it's
Uh,
funny. Was it
yeah.
Debbie Davies? Something like that. But anyway, and just the night before they showed up at the house, he played in L.A. and they're out walking, and she tripped over a curb, broke her collarbone,
Oh, oh.
and was in constant pain, but refused to take painkillers because it affected her voice.
Wow.
What a trooper that is!
That's like they don't make them like that anymore.
You know, and it
Yeah.
was great meeting Chris, and through Chris I also met Kenny Vaughn and all that, and
That's
those
right.
guys and Marty are just full of country lore, even though they weren't around for so much of the history. They know it forward and back.
Yeah.
You know,
Uh,
so,
Marty is my Mississippi brother. He is
yeah,
from Mississippi, and I don't know, the identity of being from Mississippi is becoming more important to me because it's a real humble place, and that's why I appreciate everything Marty Stewart's been able to accomplish in his career.
and I haven't learned too much about it, but he's kind of built a museum of all his rare country stuff that I think he's opening in Mississippi because
Oh,
it's
fabulous. He's from Neshoba County, I believe, Philadelphia, Mississippi. That's the Pine Belt. When we have talked about Masonite, and I talk
yeah.
about the Pine Belt, my dad's business with Masonite, that is loosely around the Pine Belt. There's pine trees everywhere. It's very different than the Delta. So, have you ever been to Mississippi? I don't think I've ever asked you.
I don't think I have. If so,
Yeah,
I drove through without noticing,
it's possible.
maybe, because I don't
Yeah.
think I have.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, and American music wouldn't be the same without its fertile soil. So that's why I like to talk about it.
Yeah.
I've gotten now. There's one more thing before we get into gear talk. Not only do you have this respect for these instruments as a fan, and that's why you started getting into them and purchasing them, but another major catalyst to your journalism career is you and your cohort, Steve Sost, if I'm right. You guys go to go to Hawaii and meet Nat Daniel, right?
Well, I went to Hawaii.
Oh,
I
okay, great.
went there to stay with an ex-girlfriend. For some
Okay.
reason, I was sleeping in her closet in a sleeping bag, but she didn't have a spare bed, and it was an ex-girlfriend, so it wasn't getting in her bed. Um, and
Hot-
and somehow we had heard that Nat, when he sold Danelectro, had retired to Hawaii. So I thought, what the hell? So I went looking for Nat Daniel in the Honolulu phone book, found him, called him up. And he initially seemed really reticent about talking. No one had talked to him about this. Was like 1982, I think it was. And no one had talked to him about Danelectro since he'd sold the company, and or since he'd left, and they shut the company down in '69. And I think originally he wondered if I was some young attorney trying to find a reason to sue him, like maybe someone got electrocuted with his guitars or something like that. It wasn't so. I really started talking the particulars of what was inside Danelectros and all. He just sort of like opened up and talked a lot more freely. He had me up to his house, which was sort of in the hills above Honolulu,
Okay.
and just talked for a couple of hours and all that stuff. And he still owned two Danelectros. Actually, they were both Corals. One was a Coral, the electric sitar, and the other was, I think, a Coral Longhorn of the basic guitar or something like that. That's all he had from his legacy from back then, and really hadn't thought about it much. This is when he was into designing what he called the super outrigger.
Mm-hmm.
Come up with a gigantic outrigger they thought would be the perfect vehicle for taking people across the water from island to island in Hawaii and all. It never quite sold, but he built a kind of a working prototype of it and all, and that's mainly what he was on at the time. But
Yeah.
once we kind of warmed him up to talking to, well, initially it was just me interviewing him, and then early the next year in '83, he found himself in California for some reason or another, and
Gotcha.
Steve and I went to interview him in his hotel room, and all, which
Ah.
was helpful because Steve knew a lot more of the minutiae of what makes a guitar not fall apart and that sort of stuff. No, so we did it together and then wrote the first article anyone had written on Danelectros, and which ran in Guitar World in 1983. And it was that let the music critic at the Register know that I knew how to write and that sort of
Gotcha.
stuff. So that's what pulled me into journalism
Gotcha.
and all that initially. So I have that to blame for my for my horrible career, and all that. And also, it was, Steve and I crammed so much information in that article because Nat was so forthcoming with it, and we just knew to ask the right questions or something. That most of the information that people have on Danelectro came from that one article back then.
Yeah.
And one story that just cracks me up is there's kind of I don't know if it's still around, a notorious music store in Tucson called the Chicago Store. The rumor was that Chicago mobsters would come during the harsh winters in Chicago, or if the heat got down on them too much, meaning the cops, they would just go down to, Tucson for a few months and launder their money through this music store. I'm not sure if that was true or not, but all I know is all the times I was there, they never seemed to care if they sold a thing or not.
Yeah.
Like it was just a mess of a store by that point, and you'd actually have to dig through collapsed shelves and things to find instruments there. And you go up to the front desk, and it could be missing pickups, warped all over the place, all this stuff. They'd be asking more than a mint copy would sell for. They didn't seem to care if they ever sold anything. And about a year after 1983, maybe 84 or something, I was there in the store, and they had one of the Danelectro Silvertone case amp models, like the one pickup model, marked up for like a stupid high price, like $500 when those guitars were going for like 60. And he said, and they had a sign saying it's a 1953. And this young salesman there comes up and starts doing a hard sell on all this stuff. And I said, by the way, this isn't a 53. This is made at least a decade after that. He said, what do you think? You don't know anything else. And you got in this argument. Even after I left, the guy followed me and my girlfriend out onto the street, onto the sidewalk, arguing with about it. They said, what makes you think you're so right? This is from 1953 and all this stuff. And I said, I asked him, well, what's your source of information? And he said, well, the article in Guitar World. I said, go read it again. I wrote it and all that stuff. It's about the only time in my life I get to have a comeuppance like that. So there's that.
Dropped your own name.
Yeah. So,
that's fabulous. Yeah. I've read pieces and excerpts of it. You're good about sharing a lot of the things that were in that article, but it was a watershed moment for your Danelectro journalism career, and I know a lot of people learned a lot about that. And you got to meet Nat Daniel. Amazing.
Oh, yeah. And I got Christmas cards from her for years. At one point, I got a letter from him wanting to find if I knew anybody that wanted to move there and be his houseboy, clean the windows and all that sort of stuff, like live in. And I gave it some serious thought. I like Hawaii. He's got a beautiful daughter, all this other stuff. And I could be a houseboy, but I never followed through on that.
Oh, goodness. He sounds so charming to me. And he was an inventor. For anybody who doesn't know at this point, Nat Daniel did not play music, which is why he didn't probably have an arsenal of the guitars he helped design. But he was an inventor and a problem solver, and that all extrapolates into that whole outrigger thing, solving a problem with island-to-island transport. It was...
Yeah, and everything he did was for a reason. He wasn't using the lipstick pickup covers because they were cute. It was because he was the first guy to totally shield his guitars, so they wouldn't hum. And that was like the main point of those pickups. This guitar here, basically the same pickup under these plastic covers, but unshielded. Yeah. So within a year or two, he discovered the lipstick covers and started stuffing his pickup coils in that. And there was an advantage to having the two pickup covers there, like a humbucking pickup, pretty well shielded, but because it was a consistent shield all the way around the pickup, it acted somehow as a transformer loop that would actually cut some of the high frequencies out of it. And on his, because the two tubes never quite entirely touch and meet in the middle there, he avoided that. They said, even on the catalogs, they said, avoids the shorted turn effect, so you get full fidelity or something like that, and the shorted turn effect was the thing that would cause a full shielding of a loop. You would lose some of the high fidelity sound of it, of the upper register treble sort of stuff.
Wow.
So clever ideas that, behind all of that stuff, he usually had a reason for it.
Yeah, clever. And when I first learned what the whole totally shielded thing was, and I also learned a lot from a chat with his son, Howard, that totally shielded thing was something that he learned in his civilian service for the war effort when he was with the Signal Corps there in New Jersey. And that was very important work. My father was a World War II veteran who relied on radio communication, so I know how important that work he was doing.
But things like the spark plugs in Jeeps were causing this blunk sound in the radio communications, all that sort of stuff. So he became really serious about learning how to shield stuff then, evidently. And just other things like, the necks on his guitars, instead of having adjustable truss rods, had the two steel bars in them. And there's something called Young's modulus of elasticity. which was some form of measuring the tensile strength of steel. And he said you could buy the cheapest steel, and it would be enough to, counterbalance all the tension that tuned-up strings would put on a neck. So that's what he went with, and with rare exception, like mostly when it's like the log-scale bases didn't hold up quite so well, but generally, those two truss rods in there never couldn't adjust them and never had to adjust them. 50, 60 years later, they're still doing the do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So we covered all of the stuff I wanted to cover before we got into what I know people and I will be excited to see, which is your specimens. You have a lot of interesting guitars in this realm, and I want you to play show and tell. And this is an audio podcast, but Spotify, you can see the video, and I also put it on YouTube. So if you're listening to it and you want to see Jim show these guitars, you got to go somewhere where we've got the video. But we're going to play show and tell. Are you ready?
Oh, all right. Did we already see a sufficiency of this guy?
Did I miss anything? Did I miss anything you'd like to say? I'm sorry, I should have asked you that.
No. Again, I just thought it was part of his genius that he wasn't glomming onto this thing. Look what I invented and sticking with it. He just realized that he could do better and did better. Some geniuses get stuck up with their own genius and never allow things to grow and change and get better, whereas Nat just jumped right in and made a better guitar than this and went to Masonite for one thing, which he just said was really stable. You could work it well and all that stuff. So who needs wood? Yeah. And something, if we ever get around to making and finishing the Danelectro documentary, something I want to do is have like a luthier, like somebody making an arch top and saying what they go for is a tap tone, where you tap on the wood and see what sort of tonality it possesses. And I would say, well, here's the tap tone for a Danelectro, and just have somebody knocking on an apartment door, because Masonite was what you always see on cheap motel doors, the back of furniture, and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it wasn't really viewed as a guitar wood or a tone wood, but they sure sound great.
Sure do.
Let's see what.
So the one you've got in your hand, tell me about this one, because this is really origin of the species.
1954. It says Silvertone on the headstock because he had been making amplifiers for Sears, I think, since the late 40s. And they either asked him or he said to them, something, I can make a guitar. One way or the other, he wound up making guitars. And this was his first attempt. And within a year or so, he shifted to Masonite and the pickups, designs, and everything else that kind of lasted through his career. So let me find something else old and fun. This is the first Danelectro I bought, though I didn't buy it for myself. Whoops. Are you going to work? Oh, the pickup's falling out. Never mind. Well, isn't the granny performing right now?
Yeah.
No, that's as good as it's going to get.
Tap on it. Tap on it like a wood door.
Come in.
Sounds like Masonite.
Police. But this is the first Longhorn basses. You can tell them apart about the first year or so they made them. The pickups are right next to each other here, as opposed to and falling out, as opposed to split the way that actually you get more treble out of it with one of them here. And the reason for this, they actually sound kind of cool together, but the reason for it was he also simultaneously, in 58, the year he put out the first Longhorn basses, he also put out the Guitarlin, same body, but a guitar, but with a 31 fret neck, which would take it up well into the realm of like a mandolin, hence the name Guitarlin. And the pickups on that had to be close together because the bridge for this, for the Guitarlin, had to be like here, so there wasn't room for any pickups anywhere but right here. And I think just being cost conscious, he thought, well, let's just make the same bodies, the same pickup placement for both of these. Then after a while, though, I guess bass players said, yeah, you might do better with the other pickup here. So within a year or so, that split off. But folks out there, if you ever find one of the pickups are here, buy it because they're bitching.
I never knew that to recognize it visually. That's something I just learned.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so anyway, so this I found in a pawn shop for $25 with my friend Dave Grogan, who was a bass player except he didn't have a bass. So he didn't have 25 bucks. I did. And so I bought this, and then not too many months later, I had already bought my first electric guitar, which was a Rickenbacker, which I have to say was a piece of crap. It was a handsome piece of crap, but it just did not play well. It was impossible. It was a three-quarter scale guitar with a tiny neck and a bridge that would float this way or this way, so you could never get it intonated and in tune. The pickup was so far from the strings, it was absolutely anemic, and you couldn't do a thing about it. And I had blown like 2 years of, you know, golf caddying, newspaper throwing, shoe polishing sort of stuff to save up, and spent it all in a music store on that thing, the Rickenbacker. And the guy selling it was lying about it left and right. And I was really unhappy with it. Then, mere weeks later, after buying that, went to my first swap meet. There was a guy out there with a beautiful blue metal flick Stratocaster for 90 bucks, which I couldn't afford because I'd bought the Rickenbacker. He also had a Danelectro for 25 bucks. And my friend Dave was there with me. I said, this would be a great time to pay me back for that Longhorn. And he did. And that was my first Danelectro, which was one pickup, two cutaway, which I still have in a box somewhere. But the neck of it wound up on this guy. So this is the neck of my first Danelectro.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. This is one of the bronze-colored ones or something. And then, because I love Hawaiian koa wood, I was born in Hawaii, by the way. And so I got Steve to make a body out of some koa wood that we'd found, and
Man, that is
electro pickups, Danelectro neck, and one of the neat things about Danelectros is on any of their two pickup guitars, they're basically wired humbucking. So if, you know, any Danelectro you have of the original ones, and I think most of the reissues, though not the Jerry Jones ones, if you use both pickups, they get a little louder, you know, because they're wired in series with one running to the other, and they don't hum, and they're louder and they're happy. And you put that through a fuzz tone, and it's a really, really happy guitar.
I want to ask you to hold that up to the screen. I want to take it's just so beautiful. I got to take a picture. I know this is silly to I could get a screenshot, but it is just it's a real unicorn because it's got what I guess I'll get the back too. Hold on.
Right, let's get that out of there. Yeah.
The guitar paparazzi. It's is that considered a tone wood? This wood that you've got on it?
Yeah. Koa wood, along with being a really pretty wood, is a good tone wood. It sort of was really like in the early days of ukuleles. Koa was sort of what it was all about, and ukuleles are what saved companies like Martin, and you know, in the 20s and the early 30s during the Depression. You know, guitars cost a lot, ukuleles were a lot cheaper. And so they made a whole lot of ukuleles and kept their people employed, and also started making some of their instruments, you know, their guitars out of koa wood. And also, like if you've ever seen like David Lindley playing a Weissenborn guitar with like a lap, you know, kind of a pear-shaped lap guitar he played steel on, those are all made out of koa wood too. They're kind of a nice magical wood.
Gorgeous.
Mostly from Hawaii. So there's that. What else should I grab? I'll grab everything. Here we go.
You tell me. You have the interesting things.
Yeah.
I can't remember what all you have, quite honestly.
Yeah. I forget myself sometimes. I don't have any Danelectro amps right now. I've got one that's in pieces, but otherwise not much.
Yeah.
And they're good sounding amps, though. I always wish he'd made an amp where he didn't have cost constraints. You know, everything he made as inexpensively as he could.
Yeah.
And I wish he'd put out, you know, more stuff for like a market, you know, where it didn't have to be as inexpensive as it could be. Because I think he had some great ideas. Like his early amplifiers, like in the 30s, had a greater output range, like in terms of fidelity, like lower notes, high notes, than anyone else was making at the time.
Here's one thing I want to brag that I know, and I bet you know this. You know that particle board that he has many of those amps in. You know that's called homosote.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, it's another weird
Yeah,
forest byproduct that's
yeah,
originally was recycled newspapers, and I thought that was such an
yeah,
interesting material choice. But it's not for life, you know. It's
yeah. It always looked to me like wasp waddle, like
yeah.
wasp for it.
I had somebody describe it as kind of paper mache like.
Yeah,
And when I went to find out how the material is described, even Wikipedia describes it as like paper mache, which isn't very, solid.
yeah. When it got wet, it didn't do them much good. And it was some way there was kind of a neat. Here's my face
Oh
again.
yeah, really.
Kind of a neat design because it
Yeah.
didn't have much sound reflection in the cabinets. It didn't kind of create its own murkiness, but it also didn't project very well. Like one of the things, I would take a Danelectro head and plug
Hmm.
it into like a real guitar cabinet made out of wood and good speakers, and they sound great. At least a lot better than they do in like most
Yeah.
of the original speakers and cabinetry. Here comes other stuff.
All right, more guitars.
The same day,
Dun,
same swap
dun,
meet
dun.
that
Ooh.
the neck from that guitar came from. Um, in the next aisle, somebody had this bass, you know, which is a double cutaway bass, which someone had cut the horns off of and made it more this teardrop shape when I bought it. Um,
Chop the horns off of it.
yeah. And this was originally a four-string bass. The finish was gone off it when I got it, so I just sort of kept it this way. At one point, I had a second pickup on it and things. And when I got it, I looked inside the body, and there was like a piece of paper way inside there. And I had to take like a couple of chopsticks and a while to finally pull it out because I thought, wow, secret Danelectro information or something. And inside was what I could only assume was like the 8-year longer remnants of a BLT sandwich. So no great information, but still fun to pull out of the instrument.
One thing I love about Danelectros as a music fan and a wannabe historian is that because they weren't so expensive, people butchered them. And
Uh-huh.
these modified ones are their own funny stories. These things where they lopped this off, tried to make it look like that, spray painted it, put a pickup here. Now, I
Yeah.
guess these are the kind of things that you would do to guitars you didn't spend a lot of money on,
Uh-huh.
and you're not interested in preserving so much. And look at that one and I imagine what the person, they were probably like, I'm going to make this look like a teardrop, what they were trying to do with that
Yeah.
by chopping its horns off. It's so
Yeah.
crazy.
And this was $1. Honestly, it was.
Hey,
And
does it sound good when you play it? Have you had
yeah,
it? Yeah.
yeah, it
So,
sounds lovely. It's been so many different things though. When I had a Danelectro double neck, which is a whole other story, I had this neck on it for a while as a six-string bass
gotcha.
on it, and originally four-string bass, but added two more tuners and cut the nut. There's that, and this also is a good example of what made the neck so special.
Okay.
There's the tail ends of the twin steel bars there,
Mm-hmm.
for what you can tell. And meanwhile, the neck, this part is all Brazilian rosewood, now a rare and controlled wood in the world, for the time readily available. And for some reason, he was getting it cheap enough that he could have a thick slab of rosewood on all of his instruments. And between that and the two steel bars, a very stable, great sounding neck.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't think like the neck has a lot to do with the sound of an instrument. It's just for some reason, guitars that don't have adjustable truss rods always sound better to me.
Yeah.
Like Gibson made a lot of guitars for Montgomery Ward in like the 30s and early 40s and things, and those didn't have adjustable truss rods, and they sound better to me.
Hmm.
You go figure. There's something in the necks that I guess if there's something to rattle inside that just sort of sucks up some of the vibrations of the strings.
Interesting
So,
observation.
yeah. So, right.
Wow.
The Danelectro double neck, which I've since sold, but I've shared photos on Facebook a lot. Someone had painted red, white, and blue. And in 1976, I think it was, Steve and I went on a guitar hunt to Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, the states in between and back. And in a town called Big Spring, Texas, about 20 miles out of town, Steve, who has magical senses, It was a nice rainy day in Texas, and he stuck his head out the window. Said, "I smell a Tweed Deluxe." And sure enough, we go to this pawn shop in Big Spring, Texas. And they have a Fender Tweed Deluxe amplifier there that had been, and the Tweed had been covered over in like fake leatherette or whatever. And so great on that. And in the same pawn shop, there was like a pile of stuff like bicycle frames, toolboxes, and the like. And then at the bottom of it, what looked to me like an early 60s Danelectro case, but bigger. And I thought, maybe that's a Danelectro double neck. And I asked the pawn shop guy, hey, what's that? And he says, well, I said, what's in that? And he said, well, I think that's just a card table. And I said, can I look at it? They said, yeah. So I pulled all the stuff up, opened it up, and it was a Danelectro double neck with the flag painted on the front of it. Even though they didn't know they had it, they charged $100 for that. And over the years, I did everything to do that, because all of the original ones had a 4-string 15-fret bass neck,
Yeah.
like this one, which was also the one on the small double cutaway basses, and then and a standard guitar neck. And mine, I never had the guy eventually sold it to, put a sitar bridge on one of the necks, but I'd had this as a 4-string neck, and I had a 12-string neck on the thing for a while. Made this into a 6-string bass and had that on it for a while. So there's a lot you can do to Danelectros and not get yelled at.
It's incredible. I think I've seen a picture of you with that. It's red, white, and blue. Everything. I remember the spirit of '76 and how everything had to be bicentennial.
Yeah. I don't know what the bison thought, but the Tennials, they got it.
We've got another big anniversary coming up. I wonder if red, white, and blue guitars are going to come back around.
Everything's going to have Trump on it. We'll be making Trump electros.
Oh boy, please.
What help?
No.
Yeah, no Danelectros in the photo, but there's young Steve Soest in one of his first bands playing a high school gym somewhere.
Hold it up just a little more. Yeah, there you go. Oh, perfect. Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And here, well, I've got photos. Why don't I dig more of those out? Oh. Go ahead. There aren't many photos of people just sitting writing. This is Steve in my old backyard when we were doing the first Danelectro article.
Mm-hmm.
We got a dictionary there. I don't think we had a thesaurus underhand.
Dictionaries, I can remember them well, always wanting to learn new words, and I miss them.
Well, there is a Kid Ramos, very good blues player from out here who's still alive, but the Danelectro, I sold him.
Awesome.
This is basically the Randy California model, one pickup, Dolphin headstock Silvertones.
Yeah.
Very happy guitars. The electric sitar, Danelectro actually had some competition from this horrible thing called the Raja Zitar. It was an incredibly cheap actual sitar with some pickups on it.
Mm-hmm.
They were not fun.
You keep good records. It's quite amazing to me that you've been able to hang on to that relic you have from your time with Dan Armstrong coming to the house.
Yeah. I just tend not to throw things out. It's something, one of the funny SOS connections is when I was going to UC Irvine in the 1970s, they had open stacks there. Like a lot of university libraries, you had to tell them up front what you wanted, they'd bring it out to you. This one you could actually wander the stacks. And they had a bunch of Sears catalogs, through the decades. And I went through all of them, and I kind of saved 1958 for last because I always thought that's probably their top Danelectro guitar year. And so I saved 58. I opened up that catalog and looking through it, and the page with the electric guitars on it had been torn out. I thought, who the hell would do this to a Sears catalog that I want to look at?
Somebody dreaming of a guitar and pinning it on their wall and that ideation board. Hey, I want to ask you, when you said 58, what is it about 1958? Is it about the amount of new models, or?
Yeah, I just guessed. And by the way, this is the page that was torn out of it.
Oh, okay.
Because turns out the person that had done that, Steve Soest, got there ahead of me. So
the punchline, he had it.
Yeah. Well, this
Wow.
is and also by this point they were still selling like the bass guitar that they had, that Sears had, sitting over here, was a six-string bass.
Yeah.
It's a, they, and that Daniel, it took him a while to make a bass that's like a normal bass. His initial basses were all six-string basses because he thought he would do something different. And on that, the way he put it, he said, well, if you're a bass player, it's like you're getting two extra strings for free. And if you're a guitar player, you can buy a bass that plays just like a guitar so you could get more gigs. If someone calls them and says, hey, can you play bass on my gig? You say,
Yeah.
sure, because you have something that fingers just like a guitar does. So he thought that would really take off. And aside from being like one of the essential studio instruments, the Danelectro 16 bass never really caught on that big with the public. But there it is in the Sears
Yeah.
catalog. They also made them for Montgomery Ward and Spiegel back
Yeah.
then. So,
It's the origin of the baritone guitar, right?
yeah,
The six string bass. I know it's very murky at this time period because
yeah,
so many new instruments are coming online by all the manufacturers. Rock and roll is basically a new thing,
yeah.
and so are electrified guitars and basses. And anyway, it ends up becoming what is the baritone guitar, but they didn't call it that in the beginning. They called it the six string bass, right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
That's all they called it,
Yeah.
and that's what they intended with. In the '60s, if you wanted a baritone sound, you either just play farther up the neck, or if you wanted to have fewer choices, you just capo it at the fifth or seventh fret,
Yeah.
which is what bands like the Lovin' Spoonful did. And the first actually electric baritone guitars I've ever heard of were ones made by Valette Citroen, a small company, and they started making theirs at the behest of John Sebastian, who in the Lovin' Spoonful, they would just take a Danelectro bass and capo it for a baritone sound. But he wanted some instruments made that were just nothing but baritone,
Mm-hmm.
a scale in between a guitar and a bass. And all, and that's sort of where that started, was basically Danelectro responsible for it, even before they were making them as baritones, which Danelectro never did back then.
They are really, when I talk to young people about instruments and choices, I feel like the baritone guitar is enjoying a renaissance, if not more appreciation than ever, in so many things, like,
Mhm.
the cowboy sound, surf sound. There's so many recording artists and touring people who figured out that you can work with two people if you've got a baritone guitar and a drummer. And
Yeah.
Phoebe Bridgers, who I still don't know anything about her music other than to know she's a very huge pop star, a present day Danelectro baritone guitar is her signature guitar. Did you know that? Phoebe Bridgers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know her music, but I see the pictures,
Hmm.
and it's a big sound. A lot. She's influencing people to want to buy a baritone guitar. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I should mention something else was a Nat Daniels first. Is it's kind of a big thing with people who go, who made the first round wound strings for bass? And everyone thinks it was Rotosound in England in the mid '60s. It was Danelectro in 1956.
okay.
Nat, when he came out with the six-string bass, he needed to have strings made for it, and he had round wound strings made for him from a piano string company. I guess it was in New Jersey or something near him, and they made the strings for him. And also, when he started making four-string basses, he kept using the round wounds on those. And there's there's the story about the Who recording "My Generation," and John Entwistle breaking a string during the course of the recording. They had to go buy another Longhorn bass because he couldn't find the strings anywhere. And that's because they
Right.
were exclusive to Nat's instruments at the time. And there was also John Entwistle that later convinced Rotosound to come out with round wound strings. And so that's something that started with Nat Daniel way back when, and was
Amazing.
also that had a lot to do with the sound of their basses and the six-string bass, which is this is a story I never tire of sharing because I heard it from all the Nashville guys, including Marty and Kenny and Chris. Is that Leo Fender, made a six-string bass, but not until like 1961 or 62 or something. I think the impetus for that was because all these hits were coming out of Nashville, and Leo loved country music, and here was an instrument he didn't make. And so he came out with one I thought that I think he thought would do the Danelectro one better. It was made out of real wood, had 3 pickups instead of 2, had a vibrato arm and a bunch of switches that didn't do very much and all that, and put it on the market. And the story was the first one was, he shipped, the first production one down to Harold Bradley in Nashville. And Harold was one of like the 2 or 3 guys who was doing a lot of 6-string bass work then. And no one remembers what the song was or who the singer was, but they get about a verse into it when Owen Bradley, who was producing the sessions in their studio, came on the speaker and called a halt and said, Harold, do you have your Danelectro with you today? Yeah, it's out in the car. Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break. And that's supposedly the beginning and the ending of the Fender 6-string bass.
The Fender got fired by Owen Bradley.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons was the Danelectro bass sounded so different because it had round wound strings, whereas Leo still had flat wounds on everything.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, I hadn't either until I thought about it.
Yeah, exactly. It is different. I mean, a string is so essential, like so many other things. It is the thing that you touch and bend and all these other things, right?
Yeah, and round wounds are, flat wounds never sound as brilliant as flat wounds do. They don't have quite the treble or the punch of the initial playing of the note so much. So I think that was one reason why it lingered in the Nashville studios. I think Harold's one went on the market for a couple of years ago, like $5,000 or something like that. And
worth every penny of it.
Yeah, Deke tried to buy it, but it was just a little rich for him, what he could afford, I think.
Oh, I would like to report that it is at the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Oh, okay.
Now, he had a couple of them. He had a black one. I've seen another one that he used later because he used them for a long time. The Belzuki, he used that instrument a lot, and I find a lot of videos of him performing with it in the last few years of his life. His old Belzuki. He was also a fan of the Belzuki. Did you know that?
I've seen footage of him playing it.
Yeah.
I think I don't remember what songs.
He's got Harold Bradley, not to veer too off topic, but I have so much respect and admiration for what he did with Danelectro instruments. I've gone deep listening for Harold Bradley, and I went to go listen to his instrumental guitar records because he was a jazz guy, and I think I hear it there. The Belzuki, and it sounds fabulous. But he loved his Belzuki, he loved his 6-string. He was a player of electric sitar also. Amazing talent.
And I think those show up a lot in studios, the Belzuki and certainly the sitar for its different sound, but, the Belzuki because, it was inexpensive. If you needed another guitar, if you needed a 12-string in your basket, among the skills you could show up in the studio with, Danelectros are really cheap. They intonated well, they sounded good, and they were shielded well, which was always a problem in recording studios where you didn't want that hum coming out on the records. And there was a great, niche filler there where you could, suddenly play one of those and there you were.
First electric 12-string is the Belzuki. Another Danelectro, Nat Daniel thing. Yeah, it's the first electric 12-string in mass production. In
the market. It's weird because there were ones that preceded it, but they were almost always double necks.
Yeah.
Like Gibson had a 12-string electric, but only on a double neck model until eventually they put out electric 12 strings years after that.
Right.
That's hard to figure why they had to show up on double necks first to get accepted. Because, who knows? Let's see.
I want to ask you one quick question. I like your taste in music. Are you a fan of NRBQ? Did you see them? Yes.
Yeah.
And I love them. I grew up on the sticky black floors. I saw them a bunch over the years, not the early years because I was born in 67, but I saw them a bunch in the 80s and 90s, and I was delighted to find that Joey Spampanata, I mean, his Longhorn and his Danelectro Silvertones, that is key to his tone in that band.
Yeah.
And I continue to read descriptions of that he could coax the sound of a stand-up bass out of that Longhorn, and that's another very influential placement of that instrument.
And the Silvertone too.
Yeah.
And a couple of his tricks were flat wounds, because they sound more like a stand-up, and also he kept a fairly high action, where you kind of had to, So it's a little farther from the pickup, a little farther from the neck. You kind of had to fight it for it to sound good. But that's what it was like in that fight with the personality comes into play or something. And yeah, he sounded great on him. And like
Yeah.
I think the reason Keith Richard picked him to be the bass player on that movie about Chuck Berry was because he sounded like a stand-up playing. It was just mostly, most of Chuck Berry's rock records were Willie Dixon playing a stand-up bass on those things. So it's the sound that Keith
Hmm.
wanted, but from the electric bass, and that's why he got Joey to play on that stuff. My band
It's
got to
killer.
open for NRBQ a couple of times, and and they even liked us. So
I have my own show and tell. My albums I've had for years, and I've
okay.
placed many of them on my wall to let people know that I'm original gangster to this tone, and I love NRBQ. Joey is just another player
Mhm.
that I like to name check when I talk about the influence of these
Yeah,
instruments. If I was a bass player, Joey Spampanato would be the only reason why I would need to have a Danelectro bass.
yeah. The influences were so wide, particularly Terry. It would sound like Thelonious Monk on some stuff, and
Yeah.
I saw them once opening for NRBQ at an big amphitheater, and they launched into one thing, and I was talking to him afterward. Were you playing the intro to Shostakovich's Sixth Symphony there? And he said, "Yeah." He just they just pull that stuff out of their hats.
A great band, fabulous
Yeah.
band. Okay, you were going to show me something else. What you got?
Oh, who knows? Let's see what shows up next.
All right. I love this show and tell.
Okay. This is this one here is basically the Randy California model, except here comes Steve Sostek. I got to put a second cutaway in it because all the ones that Randy California played were the single cutaway ones, which being upside down, I like being able to get up there. But this
Yeah.
is basically it. One pickup, two knobs. Had a switch that I think they got rid of on his too, and that headstock and
Dolphin.
a
That's a
Jordan
cool.
Boston fuzz tone that can actually plug into the top of the guitar and things. And he was also one of the first guys using echo, like an Echoplex on things and a bunch of other stuff. He was an interesting guy. And again, $39 from Sears way back when, and about as much fun as it could be. The Dolphin headstock.
Yeah, I want to see the front of it again. It's
Okay.
such a cool. It's such a. Every time I see those headstocks, the bubble over my head goes dolphin, and I hear this quack 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 like a
Yeah.
dolphin. It's a cool one. What
Uh,
year is that one?
this one's probably about a 59 or something. They made these from about 58 through maybe 61, something
Okay.
like that, though they weren't in the catalog by that point, but Sears was still selling them then.
Yeah.
So let's see what else is next. Um, one of the great things about Masonite is, a lot of people use them for painter's palettes and that sort of stuff, and they take paint pretty well. And so I had this one that already had a hole in it, and I have a painter friend named George Dubin, who's a pretty well-known painter out on this course, and asked him, just paint something on this. And he painted a bunch of oranges on it, kind of sick-looking Italian oranges or something.
Here I go again, trying to take a picture.
Oh, okay. Here it comes again. What
It makes me think of the Godfather movies where they always say the mafia thing is when you see oranges, somebody's about to die. Did did you know that about the Godfather trilogy? The
Yeah,
scenes where the oranges show up,
yeah.
somebody's about to die. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Well,
Except for,
you live in Orange County, you need to learn about these
yeah.
things.
What was that early movie that John Cusack and Annette Bening were in? Oh, The Grifters.
Oh, that's a classic.
Oh, that's a scary, classic, great movie. But
I've
if you're
watched it many
like, when they
times.
don't want to leave marks, but they really want to hurt somebody, they beat them with a bag of oranges.
They have a lot of symbology. And
And
they were also my high school color. And, you know, it's kind of such a bright color. I love oranges. I love Southern California. And I like the imagery, but it does have a lot of symbols, oranges.
oh yeah,
That's
Orange
groovy.
County is called Orange County because at the time, a lot of what was being lured, used to lure people out to California was this imagery of oranges and orange groves and everything. Orange County wasn't even growing that many oranges at the time, but they just like, because there was all that orange kind of crate art that people loved, that kind of Maxfield Parrish sort of look to them, that they thought they'd just glom out of that and call it Orange County. And here we are today.
Yeah, awesome.
Here
There you
comes the
go.
other stuff. Here's an oddball instrument with lots of dust on it. Uh, when Danelectro introduced the choral line, they suddenly had instruments made out of real wood.
I want to stop you and tell you that I'm so glad that you're showing me this because I get more questions about these weird instruments. Whatever you're going to tell me about this, what you're holding up is sort of a late stage Danelectro, and the tops and bottoms were made in Asia. Is that right?
Yeah, they were made by the Kawai company, which made cheap electric guitars. And as so many Japanese companies, they're also the same company that made Kawai pianos and things.
Uh-huh.
And they made all these hollow ones, were made out of actually real wood, came out of Kawai. And a lot of the bodies they made never left Japan. This one is a Taisco, where I don't think Nat ever knew this was going on, that, some of the bodies that were being made for Danelectro Coral were getting kind of shipped off to other companies in Japan too. So this is a Taisco bass based on a coral longhorn body made in Japan.
Wow.
I'm fixing up for a friend to sell, and it's been sitting here for 2 years before
Could I
finish
see the
fixing it.
headstock to
Pardon
see
me?
what the headstock? Could I see
Right.
what the headstock
I mean,
looks like?
Danelectro certainly didn't make the neck.
Yeah, that's
Somewhere,
a unicorn.
somewhere it had a Taisco logo on it.
Yeah.
But and I've had, a lot of the surplus bodies showed up, for years, like on eBay and things, and you see a lot of people fobbing things off as like a rare prototype when they're not. They're just people piecing guitars together from all the
Gotcha.
detritus out of the old factory and all. And but yeah, the corals they're not terribly good. I
Yeah.
have to say, the coral line, the solid body guitars, pretty good. The hollow ones, I have yet to come across one that doesn't sound like trash, but they're kind of cute.
They're very weird looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the original design, Nat said that he just came up with a doodling one day.
Yeah.
And there was a guy named Tony Manfredi that owned a music store not far from there that I talked to him once, and he took credit. He said, I designed that. And then I saw illustrations. Tony Manfredi had written a book on how to play bass, and he'd done illustrations of basses on them. And I thought, they were such scrawled idiot things. I thought, no way. This is Nat's baby. So,
It's
so
kooky. I've seen the band Shocking Blue, which was Dutch. Do you
yeah,
know the band Shocking
yep,
Blue?
yep.
They recorded electric sitar, but
Hmm.
some of the old videos I watch of them, and they could be lip syncing, for TV performances. So often was the case now and back then. But either it was a couple of the guys are playing the one with the F holes, and it is just really weird looking. They're really weird
Yeah,
looking instruments.
yeah. Gold Earring actually played Danelectros, like the
Yeah,
band. Yeah.
the bassist,
Mhm.
gosh, I can't remember his name. He was a very committed Danelectro player, and
Right.
I've learned that over the years he had other custom. He loved the design of the Longhorn. He had
Yeah.
a couple of custom ones made afterwards. It's a big part of their sound.
Yeah.
Golden Earring.
Yeah. And again, back in the 70s, finding any Danelectro connection was such a rare thing.
Yeah.
It's like, when I first started listening to Bruce Springsteen, you had to know Gary Tellem with that Longhorn bass. And he was there are very few bass players that play a lot that don't sound busy. He's one
Yeah.
of kind of like James Jamerson. He would play a lot of notes but never sounded busy. Just stuff
Yeah.
really fit really well. And 1975, I saw Springsteen uh, first at the Roxy, like the same week that he was on the cover of Time and Newsweek, which was sort of a big deal. No, that had never happened to an artist or a movie star or anything before, being on the cover of those two main magazines in the country during the same week. And all this, and
Hmm.
saw him at the Roxy, one of the best shows I ever saw. Drove up to Santa Barbara the next week to see him play at the college gym up there, and a high school teacher I knew had just put out the first Springsteen bootleg. So I brought up a copy of that just on the off chance I met Springsteen. And right after the show ended, I'm walking around. I found a backstage pass lying on the ground. And so I just put it on, went backstage. And this is probably my stupidest Danelectro story. Is so the first person I see backstage is Gary Talent, so I start talking Longhorns with him and stuff. And I ask him, there any parts you need or anything? I've got some spare parts if you do. And he said, I could use a pickup. I've got, my other ones, I need a pickup. And I reached in my leather jacket and pulled out a Danelectro pickup and handed it to him. And it was only in my pocket because like 6 months earlier, I'd gone to see the current version of Spirit at the time with Randy California. Randy sadly had kind of lost his mind. He fell off a horse, really rattled up his head, and all this stuff. Never had the proper recovery he should have, got really heavily into drugs, and was just kind of like this loud metal sounding thing for the longest time. And I had joked with Steve once that if I dangle the Danelectro pickup in front of him while he's playing, maybe I could hypnotize him back into being good again. That's how stupid we were on Danelectros at the time. And I tried that at the Golden Bear. It didn't work. But the pickup was still in my pocket. So it just happened to be there when, 6 months later, I'm talking to Gary Talent and says, yeah, I could use a pickup. And, oh, well, here.
That's insane.
So, yeah, that's how gone on Danelectros some of us were at the time, I guess.
Yeah, Gary Talent's tone in those early recordings is very Danelectro. I've gone to listen, and I can just hear the tone of his bass. And my husband and I went up to New York and New Jersey because I wanted to see how Asbury Park and Neptune, New Jersey, they're right next to each other. It's a scene. The factory was right there, and Neptune Beach and everything else. And Gary, he worked at the factory, right, in the summers, I think, or one summer at least.
Yeah. And I tried to talk to him about that a couple of times since, and he hasn't really shown any interest.
Yeah, we have several mutual friends here in Nashville. I've had a couple of people go, I'm going to ask my friend Gary if he'll talk to you. And I go, okay, great. I'll talk to you later about that. But I'd love to talk to him about it. Maybe one day I'll see him in person.
Okay. Let me see what else you can
Yeah, let's see what else you got.
A lot of the time, my favorite guitar just happens to be whatever is closest to me, what's nearby. And these things, I think, are remarkable instruments.
I do too.
One of the cheapest things Danelectro ever made, and it was called the convertible model because you could buy it without a pickup or electronics in it. And I think that his thinking on it was, a lot of people, their kid wants a guitar, and they don't want to have to spend like for an electric guitar and an amp and all this stuff. So he made this guitar that kind of worked. It worked as an acoustic guitar pretty well. And so if they bought this for the kid and the kid stuck with it, then they could go buy him a starter amp and buy the pickup and electronics separately. This is, I think, $39 acoustically, or $20 more if you bought it electrically. And then you'd have to go buy an amp too for your kid. And then, and I don't know how they probably had it designed, probably with strings even or something like that, to help you pull the electronics where you needed them. But for $20, after you bought the acoustic version, you could make an electric version. Just attenuate it down Electro for the other pickup, and away you went. And I love this guitar. I love the way it works acoustically. Whatever, I just fumble around most of the time. But it's, again, they play great, because, Nat, when we interviewed him, I asked him what he was proudest of, and I thought he'd think, one of his countless patents or something. And he said just making an instrument that a kid wouldn't be discouraged on, would stick with it, was what he was proud of. And I can see this. These guitars play better than...
Hey, are you...
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I love that guitar, the lore of it, the whole idea about it.
Yeah.
I love that it's called the convertible, and you'll love this. Are you a John Hyatt fan?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's got on Perfectly Good Guitar, on the record Perfectly Good Guitar.
Yeah.
If you open up the CD or the thing, there's a picture of him with his Danelectro convertible. Do you know he has a history with that instrument? He
I've seen photos of him, but that's about all I know about it with him.
If you pull up some of the Little Village stuff where he is playing live, he is playing a Danelectro convertible, among other things. I love John Hyatt so much. I went to go find an old interview with him with some guitar mag, like from the 90s.
Yeah.
And he talks about how the guitar that he has sitting around, what you just told me about that guitar, about how you like to have it sitting around,
Yeah.
John Hyatt's talking about how that's what he keeps on his couch is a Danelectro convertible.
Good on him. And
Yeah.
one of my favorite guitar solos is the one that Ry plays on Lipstick Sunset.
Yeah.
I think that's just such a beautiful, short, emotive, get in there, get out guitar solo. And I've heard somewhere that's him playing a Danelectro guitarland, playing slide on it. But
I believe it.
my attempts to ask him about it have not gone well. So I don't know, but I like to think he played that on it because it's
Yeah.
a great solo.
I've got pictures of Tom Waits with one. I can see him as being somebody who would like the primitive sound of that guitar. It's a
Somewhere
cool one.
a body that's with the back missing, so you can see actually one of the things that makes this instrument special was Nat had interesting friends, and one was Mario Macafari, which is a whole other story about he and Mario designing an electric classical guitar that never took off. I can tell you that story in a bit if you like, but
Yeah.
but another one was John D'Angelico, the top archtop maker in the world, the most respected archtop maker, and somehow Nat wound up being friends with him. And D'Angelico was the guy that initially told him about fret spacing, having accurate, intonation with the difference from the frets. A lot of companies never even cared about being too accurate with that. And that was
Yeah.
precise, where first they got the equation from D'Angelico and then borrowed some sort of adding machine from a bank they had, invested in or something like that to really get the fret spacing as precise and minute as he could.
Hmm.
So there was that. But the other thing D'Angelico advised him on this guitar, he said, well, if, you're going to want some tone wood involved in this thing. And so right underneath here, on this part of the body,
Hmm.
is they kind of etched out some of the masonite. So the masonite's not so thick there as the rest of the top, and put in like a piece of spruce or something.
I never knew that until you just now.
The reissues don't have that, but the
Okay.
originals do, and I think that's part of
For
why.
all, and they made it for years. So all the years that they made it with that spruce added inside.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
They did make it a long time because the late coral ones, they were fancier and they had some special edition colors. And
Yeah. Sometimes
wow.
I wonder if they made them that long or if they just made a whole bunch to begin with, and they weren't as popular as they'd hoped they'd be, and they still had the bodies left over all those years or something.
It's a great one.
Yeah, but they're lovely, and these I can't recommend them enough.
Yeah.
So they're fun. Tonewood in there somewhere.
There you go. I never knew that. Learned something new today. Thank you, Mr. Washburn.
I'm chock full of it.
Information.
Yeah. Wait, yet there's more. Now there's one less. Not quite. Those are just parts and things.
I've seen a video of Ry Cooder going to town on a Belzuki in his basement. It was just recently, and I was like, there you go, Ry Cooder. He's got a Belzuki in his basement.
Are you a fan of Bryce? Are you a fan of
Oh,
Bryce?
huge. And I saw the Little Village tour
Oh, okay.
in Atlanta. I was in college at the time. Drove all the way from Mississippi all the way to Atlanta to see Little Village.
Did Ryan look miserable during that show?
I can't remember. I was so happy to see Nick Lowe. It was the first time I'd seen Nick Lowe perform, and I'm a huge fan of his. And it was a magical night. So
Yeah, 'cause I saw their LA show, and Ryan just looked like he'd rather be anywhere in the world than on that stage. He just looked, and like maybe every 5 songs he'd sort of brighten up, like, "Hey, I'm surrounded with great guys. I love this music." But the rest of the time, he just looked blah. And then I interviewed him like a year or two after that, and that tour came up, and he said, Man, that tour was like the Bataan Death March. I hated every minute of it or something. I
Yeah.
didn't ask him why, but that's just where he was with that.
A lot of wattage on the stage. I still
But
got the ticket stub.
Rye, I think, does his best stuff on other people's records. Do you have the ones that Bobby King and Terry Evans did? That they were his backup singer in his band for years. Great soul singers. And Rye plays on every track those guys did, produced it all, and it's the best Rye I've ever heard. You can find
Randy Newman.
I have Burned Down the Cornfield and all of that. Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, Rye Goodo. Anyway,
Yeah.
this guitar is Nat started making guitars with vibrato, and and one thing I didn't like about him is like his ones that he made with vibrato have like this one bit of metal that kind of goes up like this and bends out like this.
Hmm.
It's just dopey. So I make my own for them. This is from from a German guitar that I just cut up and did it with. But I have another one that's just for the arm. I use like the turn signal indicator off of 50 Chevy,
Hmm.
and it was actually with that they're kind of usable. Whatever, but they actually kind of do what they should. And so I recommend them if you change the arm on them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they also have they resonate differently from any of the other Danelectros I've had. I don't know because of like the big screen or
Audition. Yeah.
something, but they just kind of they have a different feel and sound to them.
Yeah.
With this big what they call this duck foot
I
or
love that name, Duckfoot.
yeah, which is one of the seems like a very unnat thing to me. I think these were like basically like the head just it's very similar to the headstock on the Belzukis,
Yeah.
but not a good design to have on a vibrato guitar because the strings are constant movement over the bridge, and you want things to return in tune. And the more straight string pull you have, like if the strings go kind of straight back like they do on most electros, you don't have as much of a problem as the string sticking on the nut there.
Yeah.
And so why he has these ones flange out like that, I don't know, and I never asked him.
Yeah.
So go figure. Oh, I might be running out of instruments soon.
Well, actually, the funny thing is about my podcast, my computer is about to run down. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. Is there anything else you want to say about your collection there and all your exotic specimens?
Um, I could say it's not like most collections because I'm not a collector
Oh,
particularly.
yeah.
I have a million things, but it's like I set out to collect one of each or anything like
Yeah.
that. And I don't really care about the condition. I don't care if it's got the original finish or if it's got nicks or anything like that. I'm like a bottom feeder when it comes to instruments. I went to a lot of swap meets and things. Swap meets, garage sales, all that. That's where I got most of my stuff from.
You're a scavenger.
I once figured I could equip a whole band for $100.
Yeah.
The drum set I bought for $30, a $5 Danelectro here, a $5 bass there, that sort of stuff. And just because I like them, I like playing them.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I like giving them to people that deserve them more than me. That's rare, but I don't know. I have a question. I'm curious. All the things in the world you could get into. What made you get into Danelectros? Was it starting with the sitar, or what was that?
Thank you for asking. It's obvious that I love music. You and I can talk about music all day, and we have. I've always been a passionate fan, never a player, but very passionate about music. And during the pandemic, I started doing a deep dive on the Beatles, and I started thinking about the influential moment of real sitar being introduced into popular music.
Uh-huh.
And George Harrison only beat people to the punch, just like Nat Daniel. There was all this stuff gestating, and George Harrison used sitar, but everybody else was playing with it too. Brian Jones, and they almost put it on the Yardbird song. And I started thinking about what an interesting moment it was in rock music, and I discovered what an electric sitar was. And I thought, what? And it was a session guy in Nashville. I asked him, hey, have you ever put a real sitar on a record before? He said, I don't know how to play a real one. I've only played the guitar that sounds like one. And I
Huh.
said, what? He said, Danelectro electric sitar. I was like, what's that? So I go and do a little bit of searching because I know a lot about music. It's one of my biggest passions, listening music, seeing live music. And I started looking at all of the bands that used this, the short list. And
Mhm.
I said, well, no wonder I'm conditioned to love this. It's all over all this influential stuff. Motown, Philly soul, things that were recorded at American Recording in Memphis. This is music that I grew up bathed in because of my personal timeline. And I started getting interested in that instrument. What an influential instrument that has been. Another Nat Daniel, Vinnie Bell invention and innovation. I've talked to you about my list. I've got like nearly 1,400 electric sitar songs, and it's all over all these genres. And yeah, I got obsessed with it, just like my dad's bird watching. You know, it became a challenge for me to go find out who the session men were who used it,
Yeah.
and then go listen to their catalog and the producers who like to use it. And so I started listening to all this music and I just was entranced. And then as a business person, I sold things for years. And my dad was a businessman. I'm a business person. And I started learning about the Danelectro company. And I said, that's its own interesting story.
Mhm.
And just like you, I got interested in it. And no, I didn't get a job at a newspaper or at a magazine. I've self-published myself on a
Mhm.
podcast called The Lipstick Pickup.
Yeah.
That's where it started.
Okay. Yeah, and you've come up with maybe about 1,000 more electric sitar usages on records than I would have imagined exist. So that's
Yes,
a
it's an
real.
underreported story and still a huge one. Beyonce has it on her new huge record. Charlie Crockett is breaking out as the new poster boy for modern day outlaw country. Uses it, Jerry Jones scorchingly on his latest record. It's on all this new music, and I go, this is a very relevant instrument. And no, it's not a profession; it's an intellectual pursuit. But I thought it was a great idea for a podcast to discuss with people the oral history associated with this instrument. So that's where it started.
I've never had the choral Danelectro. I just had one of the Danelectro ones, like the one behind you. You know, the
Yeah, the master.
pickup chord shaped thing.
Oh, this one, the baby.
Yeah, the baby
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny. One day, Sunday morning, like about 9 in the morning, the doorbell rings. I answer it, and it's like a roadie guy I knew with Howard Leese from Heart. Howard Leese wearing red leather pants at 9 on Sunday morning at my door. Like, yes. And Howard wants to see your electric sitar. I said, okay. And they plays it a little bit. Then he's really pissed off that I'm not selling it. Somehow this roadie guy gave him the impression I was selling it. And no, I wasn't. Thank you. Goodbye. But just the idea of a rock star showing up at 9 in the morning in red leather pants. This not part of the world I was that big a part of.
You've got great rock and roll stories, which is why I was so excited to have you on my podcast because you've got some great anecdotal stuff. Not you're a passionate music fan. Not everybody who's a gear nerd is as interested in the music as you are, and I appreciate that about you, which is one reason why I was excited to talk to you.
That's why I have hearing aids now. Between playing music and having to, getting to go to concerts was great, but there's also entails having to go to concerts. And boy, did I see a lot of incredibly loud, shitty music over the decades.
Yeah,
Well, with
I've
some loud,
seen
great, but yeah, it's
I've seen some good and bad.
yeah. Well, I had fun too. I hope you're able to edit it down to something that makes sense to somebody.
I told you before we started recording that I really only edit myself because I'm such a chatty Cathy.
Yeah.
But,
Are you in Nashville proper? Sort
yeah,
of.
I'm right here in the heart of the city. I live around the corner from the legendary Sound Emporium.
Okay. Because I don't think Jonathan would agree to do like a conversation like this because he's not a computer guy
Yeah.
by a long shot. But, I could ask him maybe next time he's in Nashville, he'd be willing to sit down and talk down lectures with you much. He hasn't had that much to do with them over
Yeah.
the years. I couldn't even give him the one decades and decades and decades ago, but he does have the baritone,
I,
so.
Here's one thing I want to let you know that you can pass on to your friend Jonathan Richmond. I
Yeah.
know that he's a very Spartan guy. That's what I love about him. He reminds me of my dad. And you tell him if he ever needs a cot in Nashville, he's got one right here in my office. This is my guest room and my podcast studio. So if he ever needs a cot in Nashville, he's got it. And I would love to meet him one day. I'm sure I could have met him if I really tried to, but
Yeah.
sometimes I'm scared to touch the hem of the garment of somebody.
No, he's
But
he's a good egg. He can be frustrating as hell, but I love the guy. Um,
I cannot thank you enough for picking up from California and sharing so much about these great rock and roll stories and knowledge about the evolution of this company. Before we say goodbye, I do want to pitch Jim Washburn. He doesn't just know about Danelectro. You've written 2 books on the subject of Martin guitars, right?
yeah, I don't own one though, but I'd like to. I just don't at present. But yeah, chew on that and a couple other books and a million articles hither and yon in newspapers and magazines and trash bins all over the world.
Yeah.
Um, Also, a book with my favorite dead rich guy. There's a guy named John Crean who designed and built Fleetwood motorhomes, which are like the most bitchin' motorhomes in history, pretty much. And just
Interesting story.
a
Yeah.
guy who started dead broke and drunk in a garage in Compton. And I'll send you a copy of the book if I get your address, because he was a great storyteller. But
Yeah.
and that. So there, that's all I know.
You've had an interesting writing career. Follow Jim Washburn on Facebook. I'm gonna sick some people on you
And
because
my wife made me get on Facebook 13 years ago thinking, well, you can network, you'll make money or something. And it kind of kills it. I spend half my day entertaining people for free, which I really like doing.
well, that's how I met you. I tracked you down on Facebook
Yeah, great.
because your name kept coming up as somebody who knows something about these instruments. So I had to insinuate myself into your life. Thank you for allowing me in.
My favorite ending a phone conversation line, which my wife had this old kind of cowboy friend with a handlebar mustache and everything. And when he was good and done with a phone conversation, he would just say, "Tell me if this sounds like I'm hanging up."
That's a great way to do it. So today, thank you from the lipstick pickup, and I want you to tell me.
Like
Tell
that.
me if this sounds like I'm hanging up.
Well, as a matter of fact, it does. You,
Goodbye, Jim Washburn. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to say goodbye to you real quick in person before my computer goes dead. But goodbye from the lipstick pickup. Thank you, Jim Washburn, for coming. I'll edit this and get it on the internet, and I hope people enjoy it.
Good. Well, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. Bye. Does this sound like I'm hanging up?
It does.
If you hear excellent tone and the sound of birds chirping, it means you've made it through an entire episode of the Lipstick Pickup Podcast. You're as free as a bird now, but I hope you'll join me again soon. Comments or questions? I can be reached at emily@thelipstickpickup.com.